Jabbar Muhammad is officially an Oregon Duck, and he can help take the defense to be one of the 10 best in the entire country. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers join today. You'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. So, Jabbar Muhammad talk here. We'll hear from someone who knows a thing or two or three or four about Jabbar Muhammad later in the show as well. But the Washington transfer is going to make Oregon's defense better and can help them be one of the 10 best in all of college football. This is an Oregon defense a season ago that was 11th nationally in points per game allowed. They were 22nd in yards per game allowed. And when you look at the biggest yardage games that Oregon allowed last season, and they were mostly to Washington, who had one of the best passing attacks in recent memory in college football, probably the best overall one we have seen since 2019 LSU. You got a first-round quarterback, 3 NFL receivers. That doesn't come around very often. Still, Michigan's performance in the national championship game showed us that Oregon's defense is capable of being better, playing at another level, and I think Jabbar Muhammad helps get them there. So Oregon a season ago allowed about 103 rushing yards per game. That was 10th in the country. That's very, very good. Their passing game was at 216 yards per game. That was 54th in the country. And you add Jabbar Muhammad to a long lineup of transfers and returning players, Oregon's secondary is going to be among the best in the Big Ten. Their defensive line is going to be absolutely loaded with a lot of young, talented players and a couple of key returners. The linebacking unit is going to have its captain in Jeffrey Bossa, the captain of the entire defense. And I think top to bottom, the secondary is just so much better now. There's just a crazy amount of depth everywhere you look. I'm beyond curious to see, come the spring game, which I'll talk about later on in today's show, what the defensive, depth chart is going to look like, really just when spring football gets here, because there's so many good players in the secondary. But Jabbar Muhammad is absolutely a guy that starts for the Ducks day one. I think he starts at outside corner, and who's at the other corner spot? Time will tell. But I have a hard time seeing this guy not being out there. He was second team All Pac-12 in 2023. He was an All Big 12 honorable mention selection in 2022 whilst at Oklahoma State. This is his final year of eligibility, so he's not someone who's going to be a multi-year starter or anything like that. But this is a guy who comes in, makes Oregon's defense better, makes an immediate impact. We saw firsthand how good he can be. He kind of had the clamps on Troy Franklin in the Pac-12 championship game, and he had an outstanding season. For a Washington defense that was very up and down, Muhammad was easily one of their best players, and a reason why they played in the national championship game. He did a great job in the semifinal game against Texas, matching up with Xavier Worthy. He had 20 passes defended this year. 20. That's almost 2 a game. Not quite, exactly. It's, about 1. I mean, they played 15 games, so it's 1 and change. But you get what I'm saying there. Over 1 pass defended a game is an incredibly, incredibly high number. He's got really, really good ball skills. And he's just a great cover corner, and that's what Oregon was looking for with Kyrie Jackson off to the NFL, because that was Oregon's best cover corner this past season. He was first team All Pac-12 for a reason, did a lot of really, really, really good things. But Muhammad comes in with a wealth of experience, talent, and production. And when you can match those 3 things, that's your ideal candidate for a transfer portal player. So 20 passes defended this past year. He had 3 interceptions, 5 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks. We know that Oregon likes blitzing their corners, and I'll ask Roman Tomashoff, a Locked On Huskies, about that a bit later. But I think this is a guy who brings the whole package. And man, what a win this is for Dan Lanning again on the trail. I mean, and that's how you should absolutely view transfer portal recruits as recruits. Like that's the way that this works now. And of course they're different, but Alabama and Texas are the schools that wanted Jabbar Muhammad. Alabama, because that's where Kalen DeBoer went. He didn't bring his defensive coordinator with him. He's hired a new defensive staff. So that may be partially why he didn't want to go down there. But also, his head coach was there. He knows what Kalen DeBoer is capable of. It's Alabama, after all. They've had a lot of departures on that roster. Probably would have gone down there and been a starter. Texas wanted him. His cousin's on the roster. He's from the state of Texas. But as Will Stein accurately tweeted out the other day, it's all about hashtag Texas to Eugene. And Jabbar Muhammad coming to the Ducks, he joins a lineup of transfer corners and defensive backs in general that are just really talented and productive. And this has been, something that Oregon has attacked this offseason, and they've attacked it very successfully. Cam Alexander was an All-American Conference selection in 2023, comes in from UTSA as a 4-star transfer according to 24/7 Sports. Brandon Johnson from Duke, the nickelback, was a 2-time honorable mention All-ACC selection. Kobe Savage was 2-time All-Big 12 second team over at Kansas State. These are not just guys that have starting experience. They're guys that play at a high level and have proven that they can play at a high level. So I think the secondary, you mix these guys in with the returners that Oregon is slated to have, I think they're going to be in really, really good shape on the back end next year and capable of surviving some injuries, which, as we know, can certainly happen here. Let's get to the questions that that came about for this. This one from Cam. YouTube comments, X, formerly known as Twitter. If you want priority, go over to SUBTEXT to get your questions answered here on the show. Hey, Spencer, with Oregon landing Jabbar Muhammad, is next season's ceiling even higher? Appreciate everything you do. Go Ducks. Yeah, I absolutely think so. When you have a secondary that is now better, I feel, than what Oregon had in the secondary a season ago, and that was a relative weakness for a team that was still very good on the defensive side of the ball. Oregon can get even better and allow less than 200 passing yards a game, especially going into the Big Ten where you don't have as explosive of offenses. So I absolutely feel, Muhammad is not going to be as impactful as, a Dylan Gabriel, for instance, but you just add all these pieces up, it's going to be a crazy level of competitive depth that Oregon will have in the secondary. And if they can get better, those numbers I was talking about earlier, that's how Oregon is able to have a top 10 defense nationally. I truly believe that can be the case, both scoring and yardage allowed per game. And again, they were 22nd in yards per game allowed, and the bulk of that could come down even more is through the air. And you know what Jabbar Muhammad does? Box, thumbs down. That's his deal. And they were 11th in points per game nationally. So I think Oregon could be really, really good in that sort of situation here. One more question before we bring Roman on here. This question from Bud. With Oregon's football success this year in both recruiting and the transfer portal, can we expect similar results going forward as we enter the Big Ten? I might have to expand on this more as we get to tomorrow's show, but I just continue to be excited and think about this team, and I look at all these moves and I say, okay, they needed this. Hey, they lost a lot of guys in the interior. Yep, Jamari Caldwell, got it. Well, they lost Kyrie Jackson, Jabbar Muhammad, other all-conference caliber players. Well, what about the linebackers? They were good this year. They're both coming back. Oh, okay, yeah. Hey, what about Jordan Birch? He was great against the run. Oh, yeah, he's coming back too. I just look at everything Oregon's done. I didn't even mention everything they did offensively. I did not even mention everything they did offensively. And Oregon should be considered one of the 2 favorites going into the Big Ten next year. That's where they're at. And that's where I felt they were amongst the conference favorites going into 2023. And I thought that, playing in the conference championship game was the minimum to define the season as successful. They did that. And the more that this plays out, it's still January. There's another transfer portal window that won't be quite as busy, but still, he could have an impactful name here or there. I struggle looking at the landscape of the Big Ten and not thinking, yeah, I expect Oregon to be right there in the Big Ten championship game once again, and certainly making the playoff next year. Like that's where Dan Lanning has set the standard. And when you bring in these sorts of players, it gets the hopes of fans up. And guess what? It should, because Oregon could be really, really good next year. And Jabbar Muhammad can be very, very good for Oregon next year. Just how good? We'll get to that even further. After we talk about eBay Motors, passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Here to talk to us now about the newest Oregon Duck is a guy who's watched him play at more than just a few times. Roman Tomashoff, host of Locked On Huskies at rTomashoff34. Duck fans, be nice. He's doing us a favor today. So Jabbar Muhammad comes to Oregon. This has been in the works for a while. Oregon lands the former Husky. Your initial impressions of what he did in his one season at Washington and what Oregon is getting are what?
They're getting a really sticky corner on the outside who's just absolutely fantastic in man coverage. And while he's not the tallest guy in the world, he knows how to go after the ball with the best of them, has really great footwork, and is just really an all-around solid corner that you can just rely on the boundary, leave out on an island, and kind of worry about the rest of your defense from there, where I know Oregon's had a lot of really nice transfer acquisitions, especially in the secondary. Talk about guys like, Kobe Savage at safety, Cam Alexander, where this is just another guy where you can just trust him on one side of the field and just say, all right, what else are we going to do? We don't need to worry about Jabbar over on that side.
Yeah, and I think watching, Washington the number of times I did this year, which was quite a few, not just the Oregon games, to me it looked like Jabbar Muhammad was the number one corner for Washington defensively on a defensive unit that, had some NFL players. I'd say he was probably at least top three, if not top two over there. Probably Braylon Trice one, Edefwano Lefosio, or Jabbar Muhammad is right there at number two. Was he someone who played at that sort of level throughout the course of the entire season?
Oh, absolutely. And it's something where he kind of just continued to get stronger as the year just went on, where he was really, really great for really, truly the entire season, where, a couple hiccups, like a few penalties against Stanford that were a little ticky-tack if you go back and watch the tape. But his best game definitely came against Oregon State, where if you want to just watch what he is at the top end, that was one of the best games I've ever seen a cornerback have at any level of football. 2 interceptions, 4 other PBUs, a passer rating when targeted of 0.0, according to PFF, where he's just the kind of guy where when he gets rolling, and just like I said earlier, when he's just asked to play man coverage, you're going to get the best. And it really doesn't matter if it's a dude who's 6'3", where he might have a little bit more problems against somebody of that size, but he's not going to back down from the challenge. And he still is able to go up and make a play on the football, even when playing against bigger receivers. And is somebody, like I said, who's just going to be a true number one corner for you.
Yeah, I think that's kind of how he slots into the Ducks. I think that's why you bring in a guy of that caliber, because you want him to be your best cover guy, or at least one of them. And I fully expect that to be the case for this Oregon secondary. And, Jalil Florence had a procedure on that knee that he injured. He's going to miss spring football, but should be back in time for the fall. You never know how guys are going to come out of injuries like that. You'd hope and expect that it will be good enough to be at the level that Florence was at, but I think Oregon has a lot of guys who can play at a starting level. Muhammad is certainly that sort of guy. He's someone who played primarily on the outside, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Do you see him as someone that, being not quite as tall as some other corners? He's not a Kyrie Jackson or a Triquez Bridges necessarily, or a Brian Addison at safety for the Ducks, who are all 6'2", 6'3", and above. Is he someone who, if you felt like he was the best matchup against a team's top receiver, could he move down into the slot, or is he someone who just wants to play on the outside?
Oh, no, absolutely. Where I think that's something that he knows he's going to have to do at the NFL level, is move inside at a certain point. A comparison I've heard thrown around from a couple different people is Clark Phillips, where same thing, where he's not.
I was just thinking about Clark Phillips.
Yeah. So it's something where, if you need him on the outside, he can go play on the outside. If you need him on the inside, he's going to go play on the inside. Where we saw him do that a little bit at UW, but kind of with the way the scheme allowed with Mish Powell playing that Husky, that nickel defensive role, they didn't necessarily want to flip-flop with putting Mish on the outside and putting Jabbar on the inside most of the time. So he definitely stuck a lot on the outside in Washington's scheme, but if need be, he can travel anywhere on the field.
Well, I think for the Ducks, he'd certainly slot in as one of the outside guys, but I think that positional versatility is something that's just really fascinating to see with this Oregon secondary because of the number of different guys they have and the number of different ways that they can be employed. So Muhammad was second team All Pac-12 this past season, and he was an All Big 12 honorable mention the season prior while at Oklahoma State. He's someone who has, I believe, just one more year of eligibility left, so he's not someone that'll be a multi-year starter for the Ducks. Think Christian Gonzalez, Evan Williams, guys who come in, play at a high level, and then go off to the NFL. Do you think he has another gear? The Big Ten's got a lot of great defensive players, and they've got a culture. Just look at Iowa and Ohio State, Michigan as well. They've got a culture of playing a lot of really, really good defense. Is he someone that you think has got another gear, could be a first team All Big Ten sort of performer, or do you think that if he plays at the level that he's most capable of, he'd be in that kind of second team, or third team / honorable mention discussion?
No, I think he absolutely has the potential to reach all Big Ten first team, where when you look at what he can do in his top end, and again, I referenced the Oregon State game, but there's so many other examples where you look at how he played against Xavier Worthy in the Sugar Bowl. You look at how he played Troy Franklin in the Pac-12 championship game, where he knows, especially when he needs to turn it up a notch, he's somebody who always plays with a lot of passion, who is always playing at 100%. But when he is really challenged in a big way, he's somebody who lives up to that and knows that he needs to kick it up into an extra gear, and he can find that. And especially where, as Spencer, I'm sure you talk about every single day with the way this roster looks. I know Oregon wants to make a really deep run in the 2024 season. So week in, week out, he knows that he's going to have to kick it up to the highest possible gear to make sure that he can help with that.
Yeah, Oregon's pass defense was good last year. They led the Pac-12, but were just, around 54th nationally. So I think that's, one of the reasons that this move and several others were made on the back end of the defense for the Ducks. One thing that Oregon did with a guy who he, in theory kind of slides in to replace, who was a first-team All Pac-12 selection in Kyrie Jackson. Oregon likes to blitz their corners. They like to blitz their corners and their safeties. It's one of the ways that generated pressure this past year. Jabbar Muhammad was credited for 2 sacks this past season. How do you assess him as a blitzer?
So arguably my favorite individual play this season came from Jabbar Muhammad, and I believe it was the Tulsa game, where he had to blitz off the far side of the field. And the quarterback had to roll out to the other, just rolled away from Jabbar Muhammad, definitely didn't see him the entire time. And he ran, I think it was 40 or 45 yards just across the field to come up and get the sack from behind him, where I don't know if that's necessarily what you'd ask him to do a lot of the time, because he's just so much better in coverage compared to what he is as a blitzer. But it's something he can absolutely do if asked. But I think that just it wouldn't necessarily be in his or Dan Lanning's best interest to have him do that on a regular basis compared to what else he can bring you.
How do you feel he held up this year in the run game?
He definitely continued to improve as a tackler as the year went along. I know he went down in the national championship after suffering an injury towards the end of the Sugar Bowl, where he came up and made a tackle and run support and looked like he just banged up the same. I believe it was a shoulder that he's that got dinged up a little bit towards the end of that game when he had to get pulled off on the final drive of the Sugar Bowl. But it's something where he can continue to improve on his tackling. And he did that over the course of the season, where he likes to come up and tackle, but at his size, sometimes it can be a little bit more of a challenge and it's not just him, it's just guys of his size at, 5'9", 5'10". And he's continued to get stronger as the year has gone along. So I think that he's going to continue to do that over the course of 2024.
I like hearing you say that he's really good in man coverage, because that's what this defense is supposed to be. There was a Ducks versus them against Utah where You heard defensive coordinator Tosh Lupoy get on the headset and, say when Tysheen Johnson had an interception of Bryson Barnes, that's the first zone call that they'd had in a couple weeks, and they get an interception. They want to be able to lock up and play man-to-man. And last thing I want to ask you about here, Roman, is just for Oregon fans who don't know or haven't looked into it, the celebration with the box,
yes,
and two thumbs down. Is there an origin story to that?
Yes, there is actually. I'm very glad you asked me that, because I asked him that after one of the games in the UW press room, and so he told me that so it means put him in a box, and he said that's something from back in Texas where he's from, and then thumbs down means no good, and then sometimes he'll flap his arms like this, and that means no fly zone as well. So there you go.
That could not be more fitting. He sounds like a great Duck already. Roman Tomashoff, co-host of Locked On Huskies at rTomashoff34 on X, formerly known as Twitter. Roman, appreciate the time.
Spencer, thanks for having me.
Still more to get to. We got important dates to get to on today's show, people. Important dates, including an officially canceled date. Perhaps even more important than those important dates, you going to check out FanDuel. Of course, happy Super Bowl to all who celebrate from FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. If you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat in the house, getting on the couch, grabbing your favorite football snacks, and placing some super bets. FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3. Link them together in a parlay. Do whatever you want. Not only can you bet on who will win the Super Bowl, that's Super Bowl 58 upcoming between the Chiefs and the 49ers, just like we all wanted. But FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown, how many points will be scored, and so much more. New customers join today. You'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Do you know how many important dates we have to talk about to wrap up today's show? Not one, not two. Okay, just kidding. It's two. Two important dates. August 24th and April 27th. Let's begin with April 27th. That is the time that we will next see Oregon football take the field. That's the next time we'll have the opportunity to watch returning Ducks, who we are familiar with, play some sort of a football game. It's the next time it's the first time rather, we will see new Duck arrivals, like quarterback Dylan Gabriel, for instance, take the field in an Oregon uniform, because that is the date of the Oregon spring game at Autzen Stadium, April 27th. Remember last year's spring game? Last year's spring game, Oregon had a fantastically attended game. They had some recruits on the visit, and guess what? Recruiting's going well, and momentum around the program is alive and well. And the spring game isn't necessarily everything. It's not everything, but guess what? If you did not know when the spring game is, now you know, and you don't have an excuse to not go. I do, because I unfortunately have work that weekend, tragically, or I would try to make it up. But unfortunately, there's going to be a conflict with my broadcasting schedule, so I will not be there, but you should definitely be there. April 27th, that is the day. That is the day that we are counting down towards. That is the day where we get a glimpse of what Dylan Gabriel will look like on offense, and what the secondary will look like on defense, and how the new defensive linemen are going to look, the redshirt freshmen, the true freshmen, the transfers, everything, everybody. That's the day we get to break it all down. So that's the first date to take note of. The second date, this became official. I've talked about it before on the show, but Oregon has officially canceled its game with Hawaii for August 24th. It would have been a 13th, an unnecessary game that didn't add anything value-wise to the Ducks. This is one of the games that has been dropped, in addition to Texas Tech, to make place for the game formerly and then currently once again known as the Civil War against the Beavs. I know that does not make a lot of fans particularly happy. Why are the Ducks helping out the Beavs? Why are the Ducks not going to Hawaii? I wanted to go to Hawaii to do this, that, and the other thing. Hey, look, I enjoy Hawaii as much as the next guy. Heck, if that game on August 24th had stayed put, I may very well have been there, because it's an awesome place to go, and I probably would have been able to make it happen. That being said, this brings up an interesting thought about Oregon when it comes to scheduling, because as the Ducks go into the Big Ten, there are zero, count them, zero questions about legitimacy, branding, strength of schedule, or exposure. Those are the primary factors as to why the Ducks, in addition to financial stability, are going to the Big Ten. And so when Oregon plays in a conference of that caliber, that is one of the Power Two, because make no mistake about it, this is a world of college football in which you have the top two, the next two, and then the G5. That's where we're at. The Big Ten and the SEC have got a sizable advantage financially, depth of quality teams, and guess what? You watch recruiting rankings, transfer portal rankings, and college football playoff berths. The Big Ten and the SEC have already been dominating, and now that they're consolidating, they're only going to get stronger and increase their stranglehold on the top of the sport. And so for Oregon to be there has a lot of benefits. One of them is that from a scheduling standpoint, I was thinking about this with regards to the Hawaii game. Oregon can play schedules, adding Oregon State, dropping Texas Tech. They can afford to do that in the Big Ten. If they had stayed in the Pac and it had been a rebuilt Pac 10 or 12 or whatever it would have been, with the Apple deal and everything like that, if that had stayed together, I don't know that it would have been the best move for Oregon to drop Texas Tech, because that's a team that, it is not going to be preseason top 25 or anything, but certainly coming off back-to-back bowl game appearances, back-to-back bowl game wins, and a 7-win season this year, 8-win season the year prior. They've got a young quarterback replacing Tyler Shuck there. That game nationally would get more respect than Oregon State, who would have has lost Jonathan Smith and Aiden Childs and DJU and a bunch of other players. Their top two receivers. They've done a nice job in the portal in Corvallis, by the way. Duck fans should certainly not be taking that game lightly, because Oregon State is going to have an extra level of motivation, as they always do, to play the Ducks at Reser. But going into the Big Ten, I look at what Michigan has done. They have made the college football playoff 3 consecutive years in the 4-team era. The 4-team era. And the College Football Playoff Committee has demonstrated very clearly that what you do in your non-conference schedule, I don't love this as a college football fan. This is just the message that I've gotten based on the last several years of information. If you are a college football team in the Big Ten, you can do anything, and I mean anything, with your non-conference slate. And it doesn't matter as long as you play well in league. And for all conferences, that is not the case. For teams in the new look Big 12 and the new look ACC, you have to have an incredibly strong conference record and a really good non-conference win. And in the case of Florida State, you also need to have some style points when you lose your starting quarterback. They didn't get that, and they were left out of the 14 playoff. They wouldn't have won the national championship anyway. You know it. I know it. Everybody knows it. But that's the situation that we've got now in the sport. And so for Oregon, as they look to the future, if there are non-conference games, like that one against Boise State, Oregon doesn't have a great track record against Boise State. And the Broncos in 2024 are going to be a contender in the Mountain West. They have made legit moves to revamp their offense. They hired Spencer Danielson to be their head coach, who went 3-0 down the stretch against Mountain West teams, including a conference championship. And I think that that's a program that if they get it going, they can certainly be dangerous. But if you look at Michigan's non-conference slate the last couple of years, it's a comical, laughable joke. It's a joke. But because they went undefeated in the Big Ten, which doesn't have as great a depth of teams in the middle and bottom as some people may think, the conference is now getting even stronger with Oregon, USC, UCLA, and Washington coming into it. There isn't a need for the Ducks to play a high-profile non-conference game. You're going to get enough of those in conference play. You can play 3 group of 5 teams, and the College Football Playoff Selection Committee doesn't care. They've made it clear with Michigan. They do not care. If you do everything that you need to do in conference play, it does not matter what your non-conference schedule is. And the Big Ten, with the LA schools, Washington and Oregon, is more than strong enough to give Oregon high-profile games, to give them quality wins. Plus, you've already got Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State that are in there. Wisconsin pops up every now and then. Minnesota can be decent here and there. That's clearly enough. And so that Hawaii official cancellation just got me thinking about how Oregon manages its schedule. I, for one, am happy the Civil War is continuing. I think it means a lot to the state of Oregon. It means a lot to fans on both sides. I understand some people don't like it. That's okay. Reasonable people can disagree about what to do with that game and whether or not it's in their best interest. I want it to continue to be played. I got a lot of friends who are Beaver fans, and when the Ducks win, I like talking smack and holding it over their heads. They like doing the same in the few instances in which Oregon State has beaten the Ducks. And I think that, as it pertains to next year, if you do want to make the strength of schedule argument, which again, I don't think you have to, you look at what Oregon's got on their schedule and say, okay, is there a big difference really between Oregon State and Texas Tech? Maybe there could be. Texas Tech has got Washington State on the schedule now, and Oregon State has got kind of a Mountain West plus schedule because they've got Oregon on it. They've got Cal on it. There's another power team on there. They play Washington State as well. They play 7 teams out of the Mountain West. Oregon State can still be a quality win, but I'm just in a world in which the tradition and the fabric of this wonderful game and sport is being ripped away from the Ducks and everybody. I'm a fan of holding on to it any chance you get. So that's where I came down on that. Spring game, April 27th. Officially no Hawaii game. Just the 12 games for the Ducks in 24 as it should be. And I think the way they manage their non-conference going forward is going to be in a way that minimizes the number of big-time non-conference games we'll end up seeing because the Big Ten is just that strong and just that deep. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.